Welcome back to the Boss Too Hard podcast. I'm Laurel, your host and founder of Queenly Consulting. Today, my plan is to completely change the way you view your purpose, your calling, and your business. Be prepared to have some paradigms shifted, and we're going to dive right in. So, I've operate in a lot of different spaces in the community. I am a believer, I am a Christian. A lot of those spaces happen to be centered around Christian community. However, there's been a lot of conversations lately about Christians just wanting to do business with Christians. It's a conversation I hear over and over again, and honestly, I hate it. The thing that seems to be happening is like there's this new elitist club of business owners that have completely forgotten about the Great Commission and really what that means. Is the expectation that we're setting is that people are only getting saved in church and that people are only encountering God in the pews. I hate to say it, but I have seen people leave the Little C church from burnout, church hurt. I've seen multiple pastors step down from their positions, also burnt out, also hurt. And really the conversation is they don't know if they'll ever return to a formal traditional church environment. And so if we've got people inside of the church that are feeling like this, can you imagine what this looks like to outsiders? And yet you have a whole group of business owners, of people who have the opportunity to bring ministry into their workplaces. But yet as leadership, we're saying, hey, we just want to do business with Christians. It's really not making sense to me. And so that's something that I really want to unpack with you today. If we've got people in the inside of the church feeling like this, can you imagine what it's looking like to people on the outside? It's probably not very attractive. And I've seen my friends lost, not knowing what was next because they decided to leave the church. It's hard understanding what's happening for them because some felt like they were called to serve God and his people, and they felt like they were called to serve God and his people in the church. But then there's those people that have stepped away and they've chose to simply follow Jesus. They love people and they're serving the Big C church. The Great Commission, the discipling of others, has really become real for them in their day-to-day lives in a very holistic way. When we step out of the box and we simply decide to love people like Jesus did, we open completely new doors for ourselves, personally, professionally, and spiritually. And so it's time that we really start to define purpose, calling, and what ministry means, especially as business owners. I want to start by making something very, very clear. When we talk about purpose, calling, and ministry, we all have the same exact purpose, and it's simply to serve others. The super spiritual part of our lives is really very, very small. We spend most of our lives in the day-to-day, working our jobs, going to the grocery store, raising our kids, engaging with our neighbors. That's what most of our life looks like, and it goes far beyond what happens in a church service on a Sunday morning. We've all been in spaces where someone has made an incredible meal, wrote a beautiful song, fixed our computers so we can get back to work, taught our children something new or something that we weren't successful in teaching them. And we all look at them and say, wow, you were made for this. We've all had that experience with someone else, and it's really, really beautiful. And we're always so grateful for the amazing way that they showed up and served us in doing what it feels like they do best. Our hearts are grateful, and it wasn't super spiritual. That meal that your friend made you, that was absolutely amazing. It touched your heart. That same meal that's made by a restaurant operator, a chef, that really creates an experience for you to have a beautiful engagement dinner, to celebrate a birthday, whatever it may be. That's all very, very special to us, and it can really craft a moment. It makes the moment for us. And so these people who are operating in their day-to-day and helping us have these incredible experiences, when we look at them, we really see that they're walking in their calling. But what's happened is that we've put this idea of being called into this tiny box, and that it can only be in certain areas where you've been called. And so if we look at the actual definition, calling is defined as a strong inner impulse toward a particular course of action, especially when accompanied by conviction of divine influence. You like my dictionary voice there? How do you know if you're operating in your calling? How do you find your calling? How do you know that this strong inner impulse toward a particular course of action is exactly what you're supposed to do? And so I've been reading a book by John Mark Comer. His first book caught a lot of traction. It's The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. This last book I'm reading by him is called Garden City. And it's this idea that on earth as it is in heaven, that we can be experiencing what we all think we need to die and experience in heaven. It can be very real for us in the life that we're living right now, right here on earth, right here as I'm in this chair recording this podcast. And so there's a few questions he's asked in that book to help you really come to the realization of whether or not you're operating in your calling. And I've pulled a few of them, and that's kind of what we're going to go over next. And so there's 5 questions, 5 things I want you to consider if you're one of those people who's thinking that what you're doing, what you love, your profession, what you're passionate about, that it's not a calling or that it's not serving God. And so number 1, start with what you love. What stirs your heart, gets you angry, all the things. Then ask yourself, is this something I can make money doing? Number 2, what are you good at? There's all things that we love, right? But we're not necessarily good at them. How many people have you seen love basketball? They absolutely love basketball, but they're not really good at it. And the chances of turning it into a profession are pretty slim. I wouldn't necessarily call that a calling, right? And so we often have a natural inclination towards the things we're good at. And then it takes time to experiment and then years to develop what you're good at into a skill. But that also plays into your calling. And then the next question I want you to ask yourself is, what does the world need? Remember, our purpose is to serve one another. It's the same for everyone. But I want you to think about this differently as far as what the world needs. And I don't want you to go into, we need to solve world hunger. We need to stop human trafficking. We need to change the foster system. We need people to be saved. Those are all really great things. And those are all part of your calling and things that people may be called to, but it doesn't have to be so hyper spiritual. I want you to think about it this way. Does the world need IT that can explain things to people so that they don't feel dumb? Do people need a place to work where they feel loved and valued? Do people need honest realtors, strategic bankers that can help get them out of debt and build wealth? Does the world need candles that make your home feel more inviting? Your calling doesn't have to be super spiritual. It has to be good and honorable. If you're doing something that you love, that you can also make a living at, where you treat people well, you can be honest in your dealings, and you can be grateful to God, who's to discredit that as not being an appropriate calling? Next thing is, what doors are already open? So many of us are ignoring opportunities in our lives because they don't look like what we thought they were going to look like. I would be very, very careful with this because there are doors that are open and there are doors that are closed. And oftentimes we really need to look at, when we're pursuing success, we're pursuing our calling, we're pursuing that dream that God has put on our heart. We need to not just look at what doors are naturally opening for us, but what doors are starting to close. And a lot of times, even though we all have free will, the things that happen around us will help guide us on the path that we're meant to be. And oftentimes there are areas of our lives that God just continues to bless, right? Like no matter what you do, you may be doing this over here, but gosh, you keep getting all of these opportunities over here. And you're trying to dabble in this and do this, and you may be chasing the shiny thing, but this thing keeps showing in your life, still continues to show in your life, and you continue to be blessed in this area. And you're not really working that hard to make it happen. And so these are things that you need to pay attention to as you're navigating this process of what am I called to? Am I on the right path? Is God blessing what I'm pursuing in my life right now? And the sooner you start to understand this, the better. And so I want to share a little bit about my journey with you. And you've heard bits and pieces of this story, but I want to put it all together for you. And so I was baptized when I was 9 years old. I went to a Southern Baptist church in Arizona. We had an amazing community there. I was baptized, and, not long after, I said I wanted to be a pastor. That lasted all of maybe 2 years. And then I started to enter preteen and teenage years, and I went on a journey like so many of us do. And so there was high school, and there was parties, and there were boys, and then there was a pregnancy that was unplanned when I was 17, and just, things kind of went on from there. And I really lost sight of that, hey, I wanted to be a pastor. But in all of that, I still really valued the opportunities where I was able to help others and pour into others. That purpose for serving others, despite what my situation was, never really left. And so fast forward, it's 2018. The math ain't mathing right now, but I don't know how old I was. I was like 30 years old, 29, 30 years old. And I was in a church, and I was extremely involved, and I was leading in multiple levels. And I became an ordained pastor. And the pastor spoke over me that I would speak on stages with thousands. And I just kind of let that sit and continue to serve in my position in the church. And then I was in a startup environment, and I remember still serving in the church. I was hired at $10 an hour in this startup environment, right? You're like, dang, who can live on $10 an hour? I know I couldn't for very long. And so I remember having a conversation when they hired me that, hey, I will work for $10 an hour for 2 weeks. And you will know within 2 weeks whether or not you'd like to keep me on. And if you choose to keep me on, I need to be bumped up to 13. So that's what happened. And so I worked in that company, in that startup, and I grew. And I started as a e-commerce rep. And when I left that company, I was the relationship manager. And when we say relationship manager, I was managing relationships internally. So a little bit of HR, hiring, firing, all of that. And then I was also handling our relationships externally. So sales, eBay, Amazon, all of the e-commerce stuff, I had learned all of it. And to think that the job simply started with answering eBay messages, right? And then I exited that position and I went to another startup, right? Still holding this pastor title, and just serving faithfully where I was, not knowing what God was going to do with it. And so once again, I'm working in a startup, took a pay cut to go to the startup, but it was the first opportunity I'd ever had to work from home. And at this point in my life, I had 3 kids, and the thought that I could be home when they came home from school, whether or not I was working, was just amazing. And so I took the job and I continued to grow. I built relationships, started as a relationship manager, built relationships in my community. I remember there was one situation where an organization that I was trying to land them for the company. It was a huge opportunity, especially for the company being as young as it was. And it was in the world when Ticketfly still existed, right? Ticketfly is not around anymore, but their systems went down completely. And then I was able to step in. I showed up to the operation, was like, hey, I know your tickets are down. Let us help you. And it started from there. And I grew and I developed. And by the time I left that company, I was VP of business development. Now, during this time frame, we all know what happened in 2020. There was this global pandemic. And really the way we did business, the way we worked, the way we valued our health, there's so much that changed. There was a huge perspective change during that time period. And during that time period of not knowing what God was going to do in this pastor role, growing really rapidly professionally, and experiencing a lot of what I would call self-proclaimed success, right? Because success looks different for everyone. But I was, 32 years old and VP of a very quickly growing company. Like, I had made it. But in that same time frame, I was serving at an extremely high capacity in youth ministry, and I loved it. I was pouring and pouring and pouring of myself into these kids, into this program. It was also rapidly growing, rapidly changing. And in all this success and all of these good things happened, my husband and I were able to purchase, what we would call like our dream home. 4-bedroom, 3-bath, new construction. I promise this all comes together. We're in the process of buying that home and packing our first home that we had purchased. And I'm packing my room, and I hear, it sounds crazy, right? I hear the audible voice of God, not that anybody else could hear it, but I heard it internally. And randomly, I hear, if I call you, will you come? And I froze, right? I'm like, oh my God, this is it. This is a moment I've been waiting for. Like, I wanted to be a pastor. I told her I would speak on stages with thousands. I became a pastor. And God is going to call me out of this self-proclaimed success, and I'm going to go into full-time ministry. And I really believed in that moment that I would go into leading this youth ministry at a very high capacity, that I would go into it full-time. I was scared. I remember telling my husband, oh my God, we're going to be broke, because I don't know about you, but not all of us are preachers with sneakers. Not all of us have pastors like that. And the reality is a lot of time, pastors of these churches, they're not making a lot of money, especially your youth pastors. And so I was telling my husband, oh my God, we're going to be broke and we're not going to be paying our bills, but God's going to call me out. I was really, really prepared to step into that calling. And next thing you know, door is slammed, right? The youth pastor that I was working under, he transitions out. They bring somebody else in that's new, that these kids, they don't know our program. They don't know our community. And my heart, I'm just trying to navigate this situation with my heart just broken. I remember 2 cases where I'm just still trying to serve faithfully. We have this new leader. There was one point in time where we had students come after school and we take a bus to another location. We have this big thing, and all the doors in our facility are locked. Like, we have these kids coming, some kids coming for the first time. A lot of these kids don't go to church regularly. This is the only place, the only time that they're experiencing church, right? In the little C capacity. And we don't even have bathrooms for them to use. And just talk about like heart continuing to break. And then there was a second instance where there was fasting involved, and fasting is a highly spiritual practice. And during these times when we have these kids showed up, we had pizza, right? Because we would feed them. Kids, teenagers, they're hungry. And I understood that it was a church-wide fast. But I also understand this is a highly spiritual principle, and we don't have pizza for these kids. And in my head, I'm like, oh my God, what is going on? But still just trying to be faithful. And in all of this, God started opening doors. And unfortunately, in a season of not wanting to operate from a place of bitterness, a place of anger, I stepped out of youth ministry. And as I accepted the doors that God had closed, I started to see the doors that God was opening. And God started opening doors for me to work with people outside of my VP role, outside of my corporate position. And he started opening doors for me to walk people through business strategies, develop community partnerships. And out of that, just knowing that there were these areas in life where these doors just kept opening and there were blessings pouring in that I wasn't pursuing, I realized that it was time that if I call you, will you come? That was preparing for a different kind of broke transition, right? Because we know nobody starts businesses. And I mean, I was successful out the bat, and I'm so grateful and so blessed for that. But I mean, it wasn't VP pay, it wasn't VP salary. And I could only eat what I killed when I owned my own business. I know that's a horrible way to put it, but it's the reality. Like, I was going to be completely responsible for my own success. I was going to be completely responsible for growing this business. And so there's Queenly, and it was a huge trust fall, and it was a lot of navigating closed doors and open doors and natural blessing, and simply just being able to trust myself. And so to bring this all together, earlier this year, I started business counseling with my friend Stefan Gillum. And if you go back to episode 2 of the Boss Too Hard podcast, you'll realize that he's amazing, extremely smart. And he developed this concept of business counseling, which is a lot of business coaching and life coaching put together, because if we don't heal what's happening in our life, our businesses can't really thrive. And as a business owner, it's very hard to keep the two separate. And so we worked together, and I went through this program that he has called Master Your Calling. And it wasn't until I worked my way through this process that I understood why all of this purpose and calling matters. And so what I realized in that process is my calling is to stimulate growth. I stimulate growth. That's my goal. Everywhere I go, I look for opportunities. And so in that startup environment, I thrived there because I was stimulating growth. In my VP of business development role, in my relationship manager role, I thrived there. I was happy there because I was driven by sales, which was also stimulating growth. Hiring and training, which I've done a lot of, it's stimulating growth in other people. And in a developing youth ministry, I was also stimulating growth. And so I've come to terms with my calling, which is not super spiritual. It's not on a church platform. It's not, working with underserved youth. It's the innate ability to look at a situation and understand what next steps are and how we need to get there to get you to to get you to the results that you want to achieve. And so those questions I asked you, what is it in your life that's checking off these boxes for you? And when you start to go through these boxes and you start to check them off and you start to really look at this natural inclination where you're experiencing that happiness, where you're experiencing natural growth, where you're experiencing those blessings don't need to be earned, but those unearned opportunities and blessings, that's where you need to start. That's where you birth a business from. That's where you birth a ministry from. And so now that we've redefined what calling is, we really need to shift our paradigm as to what we consider ministry. If you follow Jesus, I'm going to make this really simple. If you follow Jesus, your life is a ministry. Your day-to-day is a ministry. When I worked for the tech startup, the owners were Muslim. And there was a season where I prayed for them daily. And even though Abrahamic religions, we believe in the same God, we look at Christ differently. We prayed for each other. I prayed for them. And then we all celebrated when those prayers came to fruition. I have fostered growth and coached people in embracing new skills so they continue to grow in their roles. I remember there's been a few times where someone in a job or someone on my team or on another team came to me and was like, hey, I have this life stuff going on and I really want to continue to work here. I still want to continue to do this thing, but I don't know if I can continue it in this capacity if this life thing continues to happen. And to sit there and strategize and call out their gifts and their talents and where we could repurpose those within the company so that we could keep that loyalty, that strive, that excitement, that passion within the company and continue to grow together. That's ministry. Whatever role I'm in, I always make sure to do it really well. And stewardship of your gifts matters to God. And so what you've been naturally given and what you do with it, that's so important. And that's the birth of ministry wherever you are. And the reality is when we go back to our purpose and our purpose to serve others, it's the reality that people matter to God. He created them. And it matters how you treat his people. So if you're listening today and you're saying, Laurel, like, I still don't get it. Like, I really disagree with you. I feel that if I'm doing ministry, it's got to be in the church. It's got to be here. It's got to be there, whatever. I want to take one more opportunity to really ask you to change your perspective. And so if you're a baker, make really good bread and do it with joy and humility. If you fix computers, do it well and do it with a sense of urgency because it's your job to keep people connected to their jobs where they make money, where they provide for their families and to the people that they love. If you're an esthetician, take a consultative approach. Use products that don't hurt the earth and make sure each person that leaves your studio does so with confidence and feeling like they are $1,000,000. You are never just a blank, whatever you want to fill that with. I want to remind you that Christian is a noun. It's not an adjective. Your business can't be a Christian, but you can. Your business can't tell people about Christ, but you can. The products that you make aren't Christians, but you are. There is so much opportunity for your business to be a conduit for God's work. As a business owner, you will have just as many broken, hurt, and sick people walk through your doors. Many of them will never be willing to step foot in a church, but you can show them the love of God right where they are in your business by simply just being really, really wonderful at what you do and caring for people. So, going back to what I started with this conversations about Christians only wanting to do business with Christians. Marketplace ministry is real. It's even biblical. Before Paul was a before Paul was a rabbi, he was a tent maker. And scripture makes multiple references to this. If Christians are only doing business with Christians, who is serving everyone else? Your business is your ministry. And I want you to understand that. Marketplace ministry has the biggest opportunity to reach people right where they are. And it's what you're doing in 5 days out of the week, 40 hours a week. If you're an entrepreneur, you work every day, all day. But it's where you have the most opportunity to connect people with you, give them the opportunity to see what's different in you, and have a conversation. Get to know people, love people well, right in the business that you've built, that God called you, that gave you everything that you needed to create it. It exists within you, and you don't need a platform for it. And so I want to end with just one more story. So there was one day that I was in bad shape. I was having a really bad day. It was a bad day in business. I was overwhelmed. My kids were doing something that teenagers do. I mean, if you've been a teenager, you've been there, the ridiculousness that comes with it. If you're a parent of a teenager, pray for me. I've got 2 of them. But it was a bad day. And I was like, you know what? I just need to get out of the house. I need a break. So I went to Starbucks, right? Went to Starbucks and I go to the counter and there's the barista. She's super sweet. She's like, what can I get for you today? And I'm like, I want I'm not sure if I mentioned iced or hot, but I'm like, I want an almond milk latte, 2 pumps of toffee nut, and almond milk, please. And then let me get a slice of the lemon cake. And she asked me, she's like, did you want that coffee hot or iced? And in that moment, I was like, you know what? Make it hot. I'm having a really bad day and I need a hug and a mug. And in that moment of honesty, she's like, you know what? I am so sorry you're having a bad day. Your coffee is on me today. And literally, I pay for my lemon loaf and she hands me my coffee, no charge. And in that moment, I don't think there could have been a more Christ-like action than a barista who was damn good at her job and cared about the sad lady who was willing to be honest that she was having a bad day. That's a story that I will never forget. That is an experience that Starbucks needs to put on their website. Like she met me in a moment of need and all it was a really good cup of free coffee. So I'll never forget it. And so I want you to remember that your position, your business, being a good neighbor, being a good mom, being a great teacher, that's your ministry. And so if you still don't believe me and you want to dive into it further, you want to explore Garden City by John Mark Comer. And so it's a great book. Dive into it. Read the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry while you're there. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I'd love for you to share your perspective. I know there's a lot of perspective. There's a lot of opinions on this. And it's totally okay if you don't agree with me. But whether you agree, not agree, you want to share something, I'd love for you to do so in the comments. Once again, I am Laurel Ordonez, the host of the Boss Too Hard podcast, and I will see you next week.